Welcome, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today for this very special program. We've moved the schedule around and moved it from a Sunday to a Thursday, and I think this is a better time for everyone. So I'm delighted to see such a great crowd. I want to just ask you to once again thank the DEMA Quartet for their wonderful performance. We are all so grateful to the School of Music for all the talent that we have here right on this campus at this university, and they're so generous with their time and their talents this afternoon. So thanks again, and we're going to hear from them one more time. But before we do, I want to give a really warm welcome to two special people who are joining us today, Mary Sue and Ken Coleman. Please, Mary Sue and Ken, stand up. I didn't tell them I was going to do this, so yeah. Mary Sue was our 18th president here at the University of Iowa. Amazing impact on this institution, a warm and dear friend, and a continued supporter of the University of Iowa. And we're delighted that you're both here. I always tell people, you know, I'm not the first, I'm not the second, I'm the third woman president at the University of Iowa. And not every institution can say that. So thanks for paving the way, Mary Sue. So I'm going to invite our wonderful quartet to do one more song before we begin. Thank you. Wow. Thank you to the DEMA Quartet. Thank you again. President James O. Friedman established the presidential lecture 40 years ago. Just think about that, 40 years. And for 4 decades now, the lecture has showcased outstanding faculty members from across the entire university. It's served to encourage communication across disciplinary boundaries, and it's brought the work of faculty scholars to the general public. Not only does the lecture honor our superb faculty members, but it also demonstrates our commitment to sharing knowledge with the community, both the university and communities across the state. This year, our lecture theme is Rivers of Discovery, which I just love. Like our state's rivers, research by University of Iowa faculty profoundly impacts the lives of Iowans, and it also flows to people across communities, across the state, within the Midwest, and I would argue even more broadly. This year's presidential lecture by 2 very distinguished UI faculty members explores how research from the University of Iowa matters to our region, to our state, to our nation, and to the world. It helps us understand our past, our present, and our future. We are honored today to welcome 2 lecturers who represent Iowa's spirit of creativity, innovation, collaboration, and public impact so well. Kristy Nabhan-Warren and Witold Krajewski are our 2 lecturers. They will each make their presentation, and then we will have a brief Q&A session with both of them afterward. When the program is finished, I invite you to join us for a reception to honor our distinguished speakers today. Our first speaker is Kristy Nabhan-Warren, who is the V.O. and Elizabeth Call Figge Chair in Catholic Studies in the Department of Religious Studies, and she's also a professor in the Department of Gender, Women's, and Sexuality Studies in the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences. She also serves as one of the Associate VPs of Research here at the University of Iowa. When she has time, she works on a lot of research as well, and her research focuses on U.S. Latinx Catholics in the United States. She is a nationally and internationally known scholar, and she's respected for her work on religion, migration, and culture. And her published work has a very publicly engaged component. She's also a highly regarded teacher, and she's passionate about mentoring students. Kristy's 4th and most recent book, Meatpacking America: How Migration, Work, and Faith Unite and Divide the Heartland, has received high praise from within academic circles and also beyond our academic corners. It's reaching a far broader audience, both within the Midwest and nationally. I should have brought my copy of the book with me today. Sorry, Kristy. Please join me in welcoming Professor Kristy Nabhan-Warren.
If it does, that's okay. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming. Good afternoon. It's truly an honor to be here with you today and to be delivering the presidential lecture along with my distinguished colleague, Vitek. Many thanks to President Barb Wilson for this amazing honor, and to colleagues Kristen Beckman, Thomas Dean, Amanda Tyne, who couldn't be here tonight, thinking about her, for all of their hard work setting up and organizing this year's event. And a special thank you to my good friend and class dean, Sarah Sanders, and Associate Dean Roland Krajewski for nominating me for this great honor. I also want to thank my wonderful husband, Stephen Warren, for his 30-plus years, makes me feel very old right now, of love, support, and encouragement. And my children, my teenagers, Cormac, Declan, and Josie, and Austin, who's with us tonight too. You are the light of my life and my joy, and I am so proud of you, and I take great delight in the paths that you're forging for yourselves. I love you very much. I didn't cry, that's good. In all my run-throughs today, I cried. And finally, a special welcome to friends Emily Sinwell and David Goodner, co-founders of the Iowa City Catholic Worker Houses here in town, Bishop Thomas Z. Zinkula, good friend, Father Joseph Sia, Deacon Kent Ferris, and Lois Minks, who took some of the photos for the book and is a good friend. They've been supporters and community research partners for much of my research on Iowa. It's just so great to see your shining faces here today. And I always tell my children and students, a life goal is to figure out what you enjoy doing, what you're good at, and make a career out of it if you're lucky. I am fortunate enough to work for the University of Iowa, and I've been able to bloom and grow here thanks to so many of you in this room. Too many of you to thank, but I see you, and I thank you for being here. So here goes. I timed it at 29 minutes 3 times today, so 25 minutes of slides, and giving you a taste, just a taste of what I've been up to in my research for the past, 25 years or so. So in my experience, it takes a village in every aspect of life, from raising children to conducting research. And my research for the past 25 years has long focused on people, everyday folks who cultivate meaning, who work to transform their surroundings, and who have courage and who are brave. Individuals who struggle and who turn to their faith and their communities for sustenance and grace, and who work hard in jobs like steel mills from my hometown of Gary, Indiana. Shout out to Gary. Farming, there you go, and meat packing. Region rats unite. Historically, and as my own ethnographic research demonstrates, many of the men and women who labor in the steel mills, the fields of Iowa, and the packing plants are immigrants and children of immigrants, whether they're documented, undocumented, asylees, or refugees. They all come here for the American dream. Most certainly, my research is focused on migrants to the United States because I grew up in a blue-collar, working-class part of the country, the Rust Belt area of Northwest Indiana, where migration, religion, and work are not only important markers of identity, but they're part of the warp and weft of everyday life. So now's where the formal script ends, and I want you to indulge me in a short exercise in curiosity. Curiosity is the thread that's going to run through my presentation today. So I'd like you to close your eyes, take a deep breath in, and take a deep breath out. This is the TED Talk part of my presentation. And I want you to think, keep your eyes closed, what are you curious about? What moves you? What motivates you? What do you want to know more about? What gets you up in the morning? You can open your eyes up now. What I've been curious about for the past 20 years has largely stems back to my childhood and the stories I heard from my Lebanese relatives from the Bekaa Valley in Lebanon, for the Polish side of my family, shout out to Vitek here, my friend Vitek, and also the Swedish side. I have a mixed ethnic, mixed religious upbringing, Catholic, Lutheran, and multi-ethnic, a lot of languages in my home. I've always been interested in why people migrate. Why do people migrate and why do they make new homes? Because that's hard to do. What role does faith play in people's lives? How does one's work define oneself? Little typo there, sorry students in the room. For one's identity of self and belonging. What is the American dream? And how can and does it become a reality? These are questions that stem directly to my childhood and what have spurred me and what's kept me going the last, 30 years or so. Ethnography is the method. I see some of you students in the room, shout out to sociology. Ethnography is a method that really drew me in. I'm trained as a social historian of religion in the United States and also as an ethnographer, and the two methods have really boded well for me in my research. Ethnography has drawn me because it's a method of cultivating relationships and empathy, in particular for me, qualitative research. Part of it, too, is I just love talking to people. I love listening to people's stories, right? I love having lots of cups of coffee and casseroles at tables like Lois Mink's, wonderful casseroles and coffee cakes. I think it's a method also where we can try to find common ground between us and our interlocutors. And it's a method that really resonates with me because it's about the trifecta of immersion. When we do ethnography, we immerse ourselves in people's lives. we listen. I'm talking a lot today, more than I normally do, but I really actually like to listen. Ethnography is all about observing, participant observation. We're uncomfortable. It necessitates being uncomfortable, and we learn from being uncomfortable. We ask questions when we're ethnographers, and we're asked questions in turn. And that's been a really good thing for me in my life, because it's put me in the positionality of being a student, not an expert. And I think about this a lot. I think that maybe a lot of the world's problems would, I don't know, be eased a bit if we just listened to each other more and we actually tried to craft some common ground. Doing ethnography also requires being humble, having a lot of humility. Having teenagers is also a lot about humility too. I love y'all, but having teenagers and doing ethnography, it keeps you humble. It's been important to be introspective, right? To think about, how did that go today? What could I have done better? Okay, I'll try again tomorrow. And that's really helped me not only in my ethnography, but my teaching, and also in my new position as an administrator, right? It's important to be introspective. And it's also been important to be interdisciplinary. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that, but I'm trained, my PhD is in religious studies. I'm not trained in epidemiology. I'm not trained in public policy. I'm not trained in a lot of things. But because I'm curious, I go to people who are experts and I ask them, so can you tell me a little bit about this? Can you tell me a little bit about that? And my research is all the better because I can humble myself and ask questions. So why research rural Iowa? That's a great image that my colleague Mo Day found, and I'm very grateful. It's a lot better than the one I had found. So I came here in the fall of 2012, and like any good ethnographer and scholar, I wanted to really research where I lived. I'm a Hoosier, so I'm a lifelong Midwesterner. We don't really know what that means, but we say we're Hoosiers. But now I'm a Hoosier Hawk. I'm both, right? And it was important to me, and I got to meet members of the Figge family. Just about a week ago, I gave a talk at Holy Cross College. It was important to me because the Figge family are a local Catholic family, from Davenport, Iowa, who helped fund my position in Catholic studies. And so I felt, honestly, a kind of moral obligation, if you will, not only to research my new place, Iowa, but to try to understand a little bit about Catholicism in my new state. So here were some questions that really motivated me for 7 years. So the book, I brought a copy, Barb, Meatpacking America. Of course I had to do that. It's based on 7 years of deep ethnography. Came out a couple years ago, still giving talks on it. It's great. My key questions are, what does a focus on rural Iowa teach us about the triad of religion, migration, and work in our state? That's the case study. So I wanted to focus on Iowa, but even more so, I wanted to know, in studying Iowa, what could we learn about the broader Midwest, the United States, and globally? That might seem like a stretch, but I can tell you it's not. And I learned a lot about the Midwest, the United States, and global. So I'll tell you more about that. One of my first field sites, what became a primary field site, thanks to my friend Father Joseph Sia and Lois Minks here, was Columbus Junction, Iowa, about 45-minute drive. You can do it in about 35, but I wouldn't recommend it because I got a speeding ticket once. It became a primary field site because there's a meatpacking plant, Tyson, which I'm going to share a little bit with you about. And it's a really dynamic town. I wanted to understand how parishes like St. Joseph the Worker, how are parishes in rural Iowa doing the work of DEIB? And I'm just going to say that phrase out loud today. How are places doing the work of diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging? Because it's really important for migrants, and it's really important for newcomers and for native-born Iowans alike to do this work, because we're all better when we do that work. I firmly, firmly believe that. And I will tell that in the late state legislature as well. So here is an image of La Virgen de Guadalupe. So every year, 12 de diciembre, on December 12th, there's a huge celebration for Guadalupe. If you've never been, I encourage you to go. It's amazing. And here's an image of downtown. Here is an image of St. Joseph the Worker Catholic Church in Columbus Junction, humble building, probably about 20% white native-born Iowans, but 80% Central American. So like many parishes and churches and communities across our state, they're becoming diverse. And it's been hard to get pastors and priests who speak the language. So I was really interested in the dynamics of, how are these relative newcomers, how are they changing the shape of this parish? What are some of the challenges? What are some of the opportunities? And I found out that it's a mixture of both. I think the best stories are complicated, and so really great things are happening, but there are tensions and issues that people are working through. And I'll share some of that with you in a bit. Here's Father Joseph with Mexicanos who come every summer to work in Bell's Melons in Conesville. So if you eat a melon in the summer, more than likely it's from Conesville. These men are bussed in every summer to harvest melons and other crops. And every year, Father Joseph gives a farm workers' mass where a local family hosts a huge meal at the end. And it's really a wonderful time of conviviality and outreach, the work of social justice. So one of the things that I've always been interested in, we hear a lot of negative things about religion in the news, and I certainly don't want to dismiss that. But what interests me are stories of hope too, sitting with those other stories, but also on the ground, what are some really exciting, positive things that are happening? And I think that research, the ethnographic research we do, is important because what we do when we do that work is it's a cold take. It's work that takes a long time with a lot of thought, and we're not putting hot takes out there. We're not flying in and out and putting things out there that are half-baked. This is research that's based on a lot of research and a lot of thought. So I want to introduce you to a field site, Columbus Junction, a Tyson Hog facility. Columbus Junction's a processing town. It employs a lot of folks in town and a lot of folks here in Iowa City who live on, Mormon Trek. There's a large Congolese population who carpools down to Tyson. And I would like to introduce you to a friend of mine. It's a pseudonym. One of the things that we do as ethnographers is because we want to protect identities, and Alain. So I want to introduce you to Alain, who's Congolese, and read to you a little bit from Meatpacking America. Alain works at Tyson. He's worked there for about 10 years. Ding, ding, ding. The alarm blares at 5 o'clock. It's still dark outside, but he likes this time of morning. It's quiet, peaceful refuge before the rush of sounds, lights, and people. And I should say it's a little bloody here. I'm going to talk a little bit about the plants. I hope that's okay. Sorry, not sorry. Alain stretches, rubs his eyes, and turns the annoying device off before rinsing his face and brushing his teeth. He goes downstairs to boil water for coffee and eat some fufu from last night's supper. The sweetbread reminds him of home in the Congo. While he waits for his coffee to steep, he gathers the lunch that his wife has prepared for him and fills a large bottle of water for his shift. He writes a note to his family, en français and anglais, tells them he loves them and will see them tonight pour dîner. For the last 3 years, Alain has worked first shift at the pork processing plant in his adopted town of Iowa. He's recently been promoted to the job of shift manager. He oversees about 50 workers, 40 men and 10 women, all but 2 of them Congolese like himself. The other 2 are African-American men. Alain is thankful that he no longer works second shift, as he hardly sees Paul, Julie, William, and Sarah. That was a bad time. Now he can share supper with his loves each evening and hear about his children's day at school. Alain is proud of his new position, as he now makes more money. He thinks of the new shoes. This will resonate with parents, I think. He thinks about the new shoes he was able to buy Sarah and how she squealed with delight to receive the purple Elsa and Anna shoes. Yes, indeed. Alain smiles. He doesn't think she's removed them except to take her bath at night and climb into bed. At 5:45 in the morning, an aging blue Toyota minivan with 7 coworkers pulls up as it does 6 days a week. The men greet each other, and together they drive the 45 minutes to work. They chat about their families, the news, and what they packed for lunch, which I'm sure is amazing. As they exit the van at the plant, they're careful not to breathe in too deeply. They have trained their mouths and noses to guard against the intense stench of flesh and excrement. Hogs. We're getting there, I'm just telling you. After he clocks in at 6:45, Alain puts on his hairnet, a white frock, and an orange hard hat. The bright color he wears on his head indicates his higher level position. There's a color coding at the plants. For over 2 years, he wore a white one, indicating his new higher status, and he's proud of his upgrade in color. After dressing, Alain walks through the shoe sanitizer station and slides the company-provided disposable covers over his feet. He slips on his sterile white gloves and enters the plant floor. Here we are on the plant floor. As he walks out, the smell of warm blood and flesh greets him. He still hasn't gotten used to it. He probably never will, he thinks to himself. The mixture of odors is a stew of heated and sterilized flesh, hair that is steamed off the hog's bodies, and raw meat that moves to the line in the temperature-controlled environment. Thankfully, he thinks, his gag reflex is suppressed, and he no longer has to choke down his own vomit. He thinks back to how difficult it was the first 6 months, and how he didn't know if he would make it. The smell, oh, the smell. I had to practice my French this morning. Une odeur très horrible. But the money and benefits are good, and the company sponsors regular meat sales where you can purchase a month's worth of family meals at a steep discount. Plus, he knows his coworkers, and he likes them. Alain greets each of them by name and ensures that each team member, as they're called here, knows his or her job and knows what to do. A section of women is in charge of sawing off the hog's feet. Another section is in charge of cutting off the hog's ears. And a third station of men is in charge of sawing open hogs' bellies and pulling out the intestines and other organs. This is gruesome, hard work. Oh, sorry, I almost lost this little thing. It's important for me as an ethnographer to do, many of you in the room who do ethnography, I know my students do, it's a very embodied work. And it was really pivotal for me to do field work in a meatpacking plant. I will tell you, I've been vegetarian for over 30 years. I do eat fish now, I'm pescatarian, but this was difficult field work, but I mean, this isn't my everyday job, right? So it was really important for me to give the reader a sense of how difficult, horrific, dangerous and violent this, and not only through quotes from men, friends like Alain, but from my own embodied experiences in the book as well. So if you read the book, there's 2 chapters where I really take you through. I recommend you don't eat before you read those chapters. So, Tyson Columbus Junction, violent, dirty, scary place to work. Primarily refugees, migrants. If you eat meat, if we eat meat, right, they're the ones putting meat on our table, and we owe them our thanks. Tyson, like many meatpacking plants, has football teams, football, soccer. We're the only place that calls it soccer, but they won second place that year. Joe Blay became a good friend. Joe couldn't come today. I believe he's now a hospital chaplain. Joe was the chaplain at Tyson. You heard me right, chaplain. Tyson Fresh Meats, he's Ghanaian, has the largest chaplaincy program of any corporation in the world. Men and women like Joe are part of the Tyson's business model, where faith is an integral part. As a scholar, I lead with curiosity. I also lead, I think my generation of scholars were really steeped in what was called the hermeneutic of suspicion. I prefer the language of hermeneutic of curiosity, but I think in being curious, we need to ask those hard questions, right? And I'm going to get to that in a bit. I really try to problematize the linguistic of faith, because in the end, there's a lot of scholarship right now on faith and work scholarship. In the end, one could say that the companies are bringing faith in the workplace, oftentimes to capitalize on labor. And so there's pros and cons to this that we'll talk about. So what I've learned from my interlocutors for this particular project, and as anthropologists, rather than calling the men and women we get to know informants, it seems very cold and distant, we use the language of interlocutor because it's more intimate, and we form friendships with a lot of the men and women that we work with. So the men and women I got to know very well over the course of 7 years worked very hard for their families. They pray to Allah. At the beef plant, there's a growing number of Muslim, Somalian, and Sudanese employees. So workers pray to Allah, God, Virgin Mary, Jehovah. There's a growing number of Jehovah's Witnesses, and Jesus to keep them safe. They touch, smell, and taste and wear material objects and perform rituals to protect them from harm. So a lot of the Latino men I got to know would have tattoos of the Virgin Mary on their back, of Jesus. Those of you are Catholic would wear scapulars, little bits of cloth to make them a little uncomfortable and remind them of the pain and suffering that Jesus had for them. And so the pain and suffering, the thinking is, right, the pain and suffering I'm experiencing is nothing by comparison. So this materiality. Also holy water and crossing oneself before one performs a shift. The contemporary meatpacking plants are vertically integrated. When they moved from major cities like the Chicago stockyards and Cincinnati in the 60s to rural areas like our state, Nebraska, Kansas, North Carolina, Arkansas, they tended to deunionize, to root themselves in right-to-work states, and they vertically integrated. What that means is basically from the corn and soybeans to the insemination barns, to the birthing barns, to the slaughterhouses, everything is connected and usually owned in some way by Tyson or Iowa Premium Beef, who contract with local farmers, usually up to about 100, 200 miles away. Those of you who grew up on farms, you may be familiar with this. I did not grow up on a farm. I grew up, Gary, Indiana, so I had to really learn Iowa, Confined animal feeding operations dot our state. These places are places where animals are shoved into tight pens, where sows, end up giving birth. A lot of waste matter. I'm going to use clean language here today. If I were in a class, I'd use the S word, but I don't know if we have small children here today. But one of our colleagues here, Chris Jones, I'm a big fan of Chris. Is Chris Jones here by chance? I don't know if Chris Jones is here. I'm a big fan of Chris Jones's blogs. They're really funny, and he's so smart. And he has a saying, we're number one and number two at Iowa. I don't know about you all, but I don't want to be number one and number two. I want our basketball team to be number one. I want us to be number one in the writing program, but I don't want to be number one and number two in our state. So these packing plants produce a lot of waste. Also, the CAFOs, where the animals grow and are raised, produce a lot of waste. That's a connection with the waterways. I never thought as a religious studies PhD that I would learn so much about wastewater and so much about E. coli. But it was great. And so that's what I encourage you all. Always be curious, because you never know where your research is going to take you. Hog waste, lagoons, and runoff. The hog waste, unfortunately, is stored in open-air lagoons, which can be larger than 7 acres. This is the real downside of the big ag broadband industry. I wanted to show you legitimately that I wasn't allowed to take any pictures, but my friends at Iowa Premium Beef took that picture of me, and there was my tag. And so I did a week's worth of Iowa Premium Beef back in the winter of 2017 when it was really cold. And I stayed in a motel up the street from the plant. And I went through the new worker training. I had to be really vetted by the board. They were like, why does someone from that scary place, University of Iowa, want to come here and do research? So I consider the work that I did very much of like outreach. And by the end of my week there, they actually offered me a job. So probably, so I think, and I will talk more about this, but that's why I think it's so important for us to do publicly engaged work, because they had certain perceptions of me because I lived in Iowa City, and they're like, you're not one of those liberal. But I'm like, actually I am, but that's okay, let's talk. And so I was able really to build connections with the men and women, the white folks who are at the top, the CEOs, but also really learn about the work that the workforce does. And so this was a pivotal turning point in my research. And I'm going to read to you a tiny bit. I think I'm okay on time. Okay, this is from the chapter In the Belly of the Beast. This one's not too bloody. It was 6:30 a.m., so we're in IPB, the winter of 2017. It was 6:30 a.m., and I'd been in the plant since 5 o'clock that morning. 5 o'clock. After I let myself in through the revolving doors with my visitor badge, you can see that, I walked over to the main plant building and met Mike Gager, an Army veteran in his 60s who's the food safety manager and supervisor for IPB's hot side. We met in his office on the 3rd floor, and after some slurps of coffee, we suited up in our white frocks, hair nets, plus a beard net for Mike, earplugs, and helmets. Once we reached the door that would take us on the floor of the plant, we sanitized our hands, dipped our boots in the requisite boot sanitizer station, and entered the hot side, or the hot floor. The hot floor is also called the slaughter floor, the kill floor, or the harvest and harvesting floor. In the end, the truth is that a live animal has been recently killed, and it is up to the 120 women and men, mostly African refugees, who work on this floor to strip the beast of its hide and to prepare the carcass to be refrigerated for 48 hours. The offal waste matter, I didn't know what that was before the research, which includes intestines, kidneys, and other parts will be removed here and cleaned and packaged for use. Intestines, for example, are cleaned and hand processed by workers and becomes tripe, for dishes like menudo, the popular Mexican stew. Mike took me on a tour of the hot side before the killing had begun for the day. It was clean, spotless even. So if you eat Iowa premium beef, I can tell you, this is an incredibly clean plant. I can vouch. It was rather quiet as the employees had yet to filter in. Mike showed me each aspect of the kill floor and pointed out special features such as a self-sanitizing conveyor belt, which moved along primal parts of the meat, and the individual sanitizing stations, where the 180-degree water was in constant supply to clean the workers' hooks, knives, and hands. Primal parts, I learned, did not know this before, are pieces of meat that are separated from an animal's carcass during the slaughter process. Primal cuts of cattle include chuck, rib, loin, and round. Processing a freshly killed animal is both a science and an art form. Hot side employees had their knives ready to perform their individual tasks, and once the hide is ripped from the body, with a huge state-of-the-art machine known simply as the hide ripper, the tail is cut and loosened in what is called bung dropping, and bellies are sliced open and the viscera removed. I'm going to stop there. It does get a little gruesome, and I want you all to have snacks after this is done. Okay. As with Tyson, there's a corporate lexicon of work at play. So as an anthropologist, as an ethnographer, I really was interested in doing ethnography from the top down, understanding what folks in the upper echelons of packing plants, how they were talking about religion. And the way they talked about it, like they did at Tyson, was like, we want to be good stewards. We're faith-filled people. These aren't employees. These are family members. I also wanted to understand, even more importantly, I think that's what I spent most of my research doing, talking with men and women who worked on the line who had a very different interpretation of religion, who did not see packing plants as sacralized places. They saw these as really profane places, that they wanted to pray for safety and health, but did not go to work for church. But for the men and women who are at the top of these corporations, they see the new workplace in a lot of ways as the new religion of America. So what I learned is that, and I mentioned this before, and I try to tell my students, stories are complicated, and that's what we do here at the University of Iowa. We teach stories are complicated. We want to get multiple perspectives. I ended up really hanging out and really liking Mike Gager. Great guy. We took a lot of smoke breaks together. I've never smoked a day in my life, but I tell people by the end of that week hanging out with Mike, I think I smoked 20 packs of cigarettes. It was like I had to detox, but Mike and I had some amazing conversations, and I realized that I had certain perceptions and stereotypes of guys like Mike, before I started this research. And it was really important for me to do this research because I realized my own biases. I learned in the course of doing this research, religion is a source of hope for workers, but it's also a corporate lexicon for CEOs. It's both and. I learned that vertical integration of non-human animals and humans' bodies, and that bodies are considered replaceable. Let's sit with that. I learned that at these packing plant jobs, there's a lot of hope and opportunity. These are high-paying jobs for rural America, and yet they're very dangerous for refugees and migrants. And one of the jobs that Joe Blay and chaplains do is they take injured workers to the hospital, right? So you're a spiritual advisor, but you're also like kind of a part-time medic. Conflict of interest, maybe. I also learned that small towns and rural areas are being revitalized by these packing plants. There's jobs. Downtowns have fresh coats of paints. In Columbus Junction, there's a Burmese restaurant, right? There's a lot of DEI going on, right? Revitalization, yet also pollution by the plant's waste, both and. I also learned that the lexicon, so all the research for this book was done before COVID-19 hit. I learned that the lexicon of faith, family, and values was really put to the test with COVID-19, and that these plants did not treat workers like their family, and they did not use family values. I think we can say that. The companies in a lot of ways failed their workers. They underreported illnesses. They underreported deaths. Here, I'm not a huge stat person, but for my quant people, my quanti friends, here's a little quant. We know now that in our state and nationally, the number of illnesses and deaths was grossly underreported. And that I highlighted this, more people died from COVID-19 in the meatpacking plant industry, all workers. None were workers, none were CEOs, CFOs. More died from COVID in 2020 alone than from all work-related causes in the industry in the past 15 years. I'm someone, though, who always looks at the silver lining and who always thinks it's important to focus on hope. Not naive hope, right? Those of you who know me know that the tattoos keep growing, and that one of the things the only saying that I got a couple years ago was optimism is true moral courage. And it was Outward Bound, which my oldest son did, which is an amazing program, is their slogan. And I've thought a lot about how optimism is true moral courage. And I think that for us, as scholars, as citizens, for me at least too, sometimes it's really easy to get caught up in the negative. And it's hard to feel that we can make a difference, right? But what I tell my kids, what I tell my students and my colleagues is that, we can't do everything, but we can do something. And for me, something has been doing work that can hopefully amplify the voices of the marginalized, oppressed, and vulnerable people. Here's a group that gives me hope. Escucho mi voz here in Iowa City. Hear my voice, listen to my voice, supported by my good friend, Emily Sinwell. I'm looking for Emily, one of my dear friends. Admire you so much and the work you do. I'm getting choked up with refugees in our area. Group of Latina meatpacking workers, right? Now it's become this broadband movement for social justice. Grassroots, right? Started during COVID-19, workers had enough, saying, to the companies, you're not providing enough protective gear. You're not doing what you're saying. You're not treating us like family. And then these same families, considered to be essential workers, were excluded workers, and we're not getting COVID relief checks like the rest of us. I don't know about y'all, but it was nice to get that check in the mail, but it wasn't necessary for me to pay my bills, right? And so these women and men started this movement, first to get COVID relief checks every month in the mailboxes of essential workers who are now getting them, and I'm grateful to our Board of Supervisors for their role in that. Also, this is becoming a pan-racial, pan-ethnic movement in our state, maybe working towards the talk of unionization. So I'm really excited about this. With all the horrors of COVID-19, 2020, 2021, I know it's not over yet, but the worst part, I hope at least, is over. These women took it upon themselves to do this work of social justice and to say enough is enough. Finally, how can our research make an impact? The overarching theme of my talk and VTech's talk is that, for me, and I know VTech too, to me, and I've said this before to y'all, but I take it as a moral obligation to do publicly engaged work. It's allowed me to amplify the voices of vulnerable people and communities. I've been able to share my expertise in places like supervisors meetings, to do DEIB workshops, literally that's what they've been called, in churches who want to diversify their communities, given lots of talks since the book came out. We can engage in partnerships with nonprofits and organizations who want to work to support migrants and refugees. And I think at the end, we can be bridge builders, connectors, and change agents. Again, it's hard sometimes to get caught up in we're very polarized in so many ways now, but I like to think that there's still common ground. So final thoughts, looping back to curiosity. You know what I've been curious about. I've shared that with you. The intersectionalities of faith, migration, and work, and how I can put my knowledge out there to help assist people. What are you curious about, and where can your curiosity lead you? What good can you put in the world? Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kristy, for that fascinating presentation. I think we can all agree that we're glad you weren't enticed away by a different job. We're glad you're here, and we're glad you're not smoking all those cigarettes anymore, too. So Our next lecturer is Witold F. Krajewski, and I'm happy to share some really amazing things about VTech, as he is known by. He's the Rose and Joseph Summers Chair in Water Resources Engineering, the Director of the Iowa Flood Center, and Professor of Civil and Environmental Engineering in the College of Engineering. He's gained an international reputation in hydrology and hydrometeorology, flood prediction, and radar and satellite remote sensing. He's published over 260 papers in refereed journals on these topics, and his service and outreach in flood warning and mitigation, I still have migration on the brain, and mitigation have positively impacted the citizens of Iowa and indeed the nation. In 2021, VTech was elected to the National Academy of Engineering and named a Fellow of the American Association for the Advancement of Science. And here on campus, he has been recognized, among other honors, with the Graduate College Outstanding Faculty Mentor Award in Mathematical and Physical Sciences and Engineering. We are very honored today that VTech is capping his distinguished career at the University of Iowa as a presidential lecturer. Indeed, he will soon be entering phased retirement, so this is his last lecture to the university community. So just think about that for a moment. I'm really honored that he's decided to join us today and be part of this incredible celebration, and also that we're able to honor his work. Please welcome Witold Krajewski.
Thank you very much, President Wilson. It is a distinct honor to be selected as a presidential lecturer. For me, it is also a time for reflection, because this is the end of my teaching career and my last lecture indeed. And now I have to follow Kristy. So maybe this is the right time to step down. I would like to thank Dean Nemhard, College of Engineering, for nominating me, and the selection committee, and you, President Wilson, for selecting me. And thank you all for coming and joining us on this early March afternoon. In particular, I would like to thank my colleagues from the Iowa Flood Center, from my home research institute, IAHR, Hydroscience and Engineering, my department, Civil and Environmental Engineering, and the College of Engineering. I would like to also acknowledge my noon basketball group. They threatened me that if I don't acknowledge them, they will not pass the ball to me for a month. They keep me humble, that's for sure. What is the clicker? Okay, yes. But I would like to dedicate this lecture to the memory of my parents, Jadwiga and Karol. They were both academics. My mom, a historian, was director of the University of Warsaw Library, and my father, Karol, an engineer, was a professor at the Warsaw University of Technology. So, being academics, they would really appreciate the great honor that it is for me to stand here and deliver this very special, lecture. But to say that I couldn't be here without them would be an understatement. Right? But I certainly couldn't be here without my wife, Diana. So my very special, thanks go to her for everything, for 40 years of love. We met in Washington, D.C. area and came here so we met 40 years ago. We came here in 1987, and we never looked back. We love it here. And thank you for 2 very special daughters. The older one got all 3 degrees from the University of Iowa. Yes, and actually she's teaching here, so she does much better than I do. The younger one, she got a degree in biology from here, but then she wanted to be a vet. So then she went to the second best university in the state. So, yeah, Well, now I would like to take you on a brief tour of my research before and after the establishment of the Iowa Flood Center. So just to get you in the mood, I want you to take a look at this photo. So we are here at Iowa Memorial Union, right on the banks of the Iowa River. So it looks nice, doesn't it? Yeah. It wasn't that nice in 2008. So this is the view, different, direction. And here is a close-up. Yes, and just a little bit further, north. Some of you may recognize, it's hard to recognize, but there's the city park underwater. And if you go even, further north, 30 miles or so, Cedar Rapids. So terrible, terrible tragedy here on campus of the University of Iowa to the tune of about $1 billion. Cedar Rapids, of course, much more. So now it happened that here on campus of the University of Iowa, all the relevant expertise how to deal with floods was in this building and has been there for over 100 years. So this is my longtime home, Research Institute, IHR, Hydroscience and Engineering. And this is where my colleagues have been studying fluid mechanics, river mechanics, hydrology. I'm a hydrologist. Well, so then you may say, hydrology? Hydrology is a science. And now engineering? Well, to do a good job on rebuilding and building the infrastructure, we hear so much about it, for the future, subject to climate change, you have to understand both, engineering and hydrology. Hydrology, the science of how water moves in the environment. So this is what we do. So now I will take you on my research, again, over the years, many years. It started before I came to the University of Iowa. I worked for the National Weather Service at the very beginning of the program known as NextRad. So everybody remember from TV news, weather reports, NextRad radar. They used to say Doppler radar, NextRad radar. So these radars are capable of taking very high-resolution data about rainfall. So in fact, what you see here is from last Monday. You may remember that it was raining, hard on Monday morning especially. So this is the data captured from that event. But to do a good job here, it takes some research. And again, for me, this started over 40 years ago. So for rainfalls, I will tell you a little bit about, rainfall. So one word that characterizes rainfall is variability. Rainfall varies tremendously in space and in time. So here is just one example. So you recognize the locations, here, North Liberty, Coralville, Iowa City. And you can have just a few miles apart, you can have 6, 7 inches, which is trouble, or 1 or 2, which is kind of nice to get once in a while, right? Well, if you were, during rainfall, if you were to look up, nobody does this, but if you have an instrument, you can do this. So if you were to look up, you would see this kind of, variability passing overhead. And so you can, see here that sometimes there is very intense rainfall not reaching the ground, and sometimes it is reaching the ground. Here, this horizontal, line starting at about 1045, that is actually melting ice up there in the atmosphere at about the level of 4 kilometers. Well, what happens in time sometimes can be transposed into space. So this is what you would see over, the landscape. Well, now if you want to understand rainfall, more, so sometimes research has to take you very far away from Iowa. So this is way, way west of Hawaii. So this is Kwajalein, part of the Kwajalein Atoll in the Pacific, a little island. Nobody lives there, but we took our instrument, here. This instrument is designed for counting drops and also observing the shape of raindrops, of course, when it rains. Well, and the hardship of doing this in that place is that you had to commute to work with a helicopter. So, well, from the sea level, our research took us to the high mountains. So what you see here is a small mobile or portable almost radar. So we teamed up with our colleagues from Switzerland. So we were buying same devices from the same company. Their unit was number 1, and for us it was number 2, 3, 4, and 5. And so I went there to explore this, and this is in Davos. So this is the place where the rich and powerful, mingle. But this is also a home of a research institute that studies avalanches in the Alps. And to get to this location, I had to ski down, so yeah, it was hard. Well, so this is how our radar, or 1 of 4, looks like. And this is actually, very nice, picture, very nice location, and you would never guess what is the location. And the location is the Iowa City landfill. 'Cause nobody bothers these radars, there. Yeah. So they have, nice, home, there. We took them places outside of Iowa. So this is from somewhere in Wyoming. The dog likes it, but the dog does nothing, just looks around, But these guys, they do all the work. If it was not for these two, Radek Goska and Dan Seinar, I know Dan is, here somewhere, these devices, wouldn't work. So, but when they work, they can collect very special, data, very high resolution data about severe storms. And we had a scare. This is also from the landfill. there was a fire, there, so it makes for a spectacular, image, here. The radar was safe, so nothing happened to it. So in recognition of our expertise and ability to observe rainfall, we hosted, here a field campaign in support of a NASA satellite, mission. So the main goal of this campaign was to collect data that later served as a reference for satellite-based views of rainfall. And so Mother Nature collaborated. We had 6 weeks of almost uninterrupted, rain. Amazing. So this was 2013. So I hope I established that we know something about, rainfall. So let's move on in hydrology, right? So in hydrology, it rains and then things, happen. In meteorology, I will talk about this in a second, things happen and then it rains, so that's the difference, here. But I want to switch gears, completely, here. And since this is a lecture, after all, you should learn something, right? If you pay attention, right? So let's consider 2 small watersheds. I will also call them basins or catchments, so they all mean, the same, thing. So one south of Waterloo, another just southwest of Iowa City. You see the names, here, and these are, the shapes. So now they have identical size, about 200 square miles, okay? One is skinny, and one is kind of chubby. They are exposed to the same rainfall climatology. They are not that far apart from each other. They have very similar soil types. They have very similar land use, which in Iowa is not that difficult because it's all, right? So, okay. So the main difference between them is the shape, okay? And these shapes, I will just, point out, quickly that for the skinny one, the water comes from, far away and then closer up and closer and closer. For the chubby one, water comes to the outlet from all directions, kind of almost at the same time. So this is the difference in the response. So for short duration intensive rainfall, the difference in the peak is significant. If the rainfall duration is longer and maybe not as intense, then the difference in the peak is not that pronounced, if any, because they are of the same, size and same soils and same land use. So the take-home message from this is that basin shape determines, to some degree, flood magnitude. All right. Hydrologic insight number 2. So this will be about weather forecasting. So this is where meteorology meets hydrology. So consider this. Again, chunk of Iowa, northeast, somewhere. So this will be an illustration, not real data. So imagine that this was a forecasted rainfall, okay? The true rainfall was like this. So you can see that actually that forecast was not so bad, actually looks very similar. Maybe it is a little bit more intense. But it is displaced from the true rainfall, not by far, but still. So meteorologists would say, but this is great, we're doing great, okay? And now I want to explore this from the viewpoint of a hydrologist. So now let's say that your point of interest is a red point here, the outlet of this basin. So, well, the point of interest or the outlet, right? So it integrates all the water that is falling within the boundaries of this basin. So for this basin, for this point of interest, this is a terrible forecast, right? Because you forecasted, something and nothing happened. So you are quickly eroding your credibility, right? Well, let's consider another basin, this one. Well, this is also a horrible, forecast because things happen and they were not forecasted, so you had no warning. But consider this one. For this much larger basin, this is a very good forecast. Because sitting at the outlet, notice that both the forecasted rainfall and the true rainfall are about the same distance from the outlet. So standing at the outlet and watching that water, that flood wave coming, you cannot tell where it's coming from. It's coming in the river. So what is the conclusion, from this? That flood forecasting skill is scale dependent. It is easier to forecast floods for large basins than it is for small basins. Well, so now equipped with those insights and some knowledge of rainfall, well, let's go back to the flood of 2008 in Cedar Rapids. So take a moment, here. So first of all, the two photographs, they are time synchronized with that hydrograph that was observed in Cedar Rapids. And then the storms that contributed to that hydrograph, they are color-coded. So you can see that the peak was caused by the storm that happened like a day before the peak. And it happened actually very close to Cedar Rapids. And it was not well forecasted because it's difficult to forecast well for a relatively small area. And to forecast well, you have to forecast when and where and how much. And again, the science is not quite, there. So, after the flood, the leaders of the state at that time, they recognized that maybe we here at the University of Iowa could help. They approached Larry Weber, who was and is the director of IHR, Hydroscience and Engineering. Larry talked to me, and the rest is history. A few months later, after they talked to us, they came up with this bill that established the Iowa Flood Center. I highlighted, here some keywords. They basically put us to work. They said, okay, so yeah, enough of this, ivory tower, thinking, so it's like do something, and so we did. We are engineers after all, and so. Yeah, so what did we do? Well, just take a look. So we deployed almost 300 of these devices who were actually conceived, designed, prototyped, built by our electrical engineers, Anton Kruger, thank you. And then Dan Seinar, also, I praised him already for his work on these weather radars, and he installed personally all of them. That's amazing. Thank you, Dan. Well, this is one in action during a flooding. And this is the network. So here in Iowa, the blue ones are from Iowa Flood Center, and the green ones are from USGS, a federal agency. And altogether, we have one of the best, if not the best, stream flow monitoring network in the nation. This is the data that they produce. so kind of cartoonish representation, cartoonish, for those who never liked math in school. So, and they are like scared or have allergy to graphs, so, but they like cartoons, so here they come, so. And dark blue is the past few days, and the light blue is the forecast. Well, so that was one major activity. It still continues. The other was development of inundation maps everywhere for the entire state. Small rivers and big rivers, communities, and just urban, rural areas. And these maps provide not only flood extent, but also water depth. And they serve, they could serve as a reference of something that could happen, so as a context, or they also serve some regulatory purposes, but for that, for the same maps, you have to go to Iowa Department of Natural Resources, okay, if you want to build something in a floodplain, for example. So then it's not on us, okay, so. Well, another development, also very innovative. Actually, it's like I love like being here and bragging, So, but thank you. Because this is forecasting stream flow everywhere all the time. So in the United States, it is the National Weather Service that has Congress-given mandate to make stream flow forecasts for the nation. But they only do it for certain locations, and actually not all the time. For some locations all the time, for other locations not all the time. We do it everywhere all the time. For small communities, for large communities, we figured out a way to inform people specifically for those locations where there are no gauges. So we cannot use a gauge as a reference. We have to give people some relevant information in a different way, and this is an example. Here, flood potential index, color coded, and you can find this information. Our models, forecasting models, run as we speak. So I hope. Yeah. Well, to disseminate all this information coming from the sensors, our sensors, USGS sensors, our models, National Weather Service, models, we developed this Iowa Flood Information System. Again, this is over 10 years ago. This is a very innovative internet, web-based, platform. There was absolutely nothing like this at the time when we launched, this, system. In fact, I can tell you an anecdote that I learned about a granting program in Europe, European Union, related to flooding, and there was a requirement that those who propose, they have to develop something like that, and there was a screenshot from our, system, So anyway, you can just Google it and you'll find it. It has been visited some 4.5 million, times. Not Netflix, but getting there, So local news outlets, sometimes they use the system on the air. And now, just to complete our developments, we are also deploying a system of monitoring rainfall, soil moisture, also shallow groundwater, resources across the state. Our goal is 1 per county. So Iowa has 99, counties, so that's it. In this county, we'll have 2, so that will be 100, so yeah. Now, this IFIS, system that integrates all this information and disseminates the information in real time, that's not enough. So we have a tremendous outreach, program. We go to places, we talk to people. Here you see one of our Congress women. We also see visitors from as far away as Florida. So people come here to Iowa to learn, from us. Now we take our responsibilities very seriously. So every year, once a year, we go to Des Moines, to the capital. We stage there what we call legislative breakfast. So we feed our legislators coffee and donuts and information. Okay, and so there is one coming up, and maybe President Wilson will go with us. So we take it seriously. We put on a show. We go dressed up, this. And we have many friends, there. So it's all good. One very important group of consumers, if you will, of our information are emergency responders. And they just love our system because it integrates data from various, sources. So again, for those of you who understand the U.S. government and the structure and many agencies, so the landscape is still divided. So if you take a domain of water, there are probably at least 20 federal agencies that have some responsibility for some aspect of water. Here, for what we are talking about, we have USGS. They monitor National Weather Service. They forecast. The Corps of Engineers, they operate. And then FEMA, they come to the rescue, And so, but here in this, system, we bring all this, together. The kids like our stuff. The physical models and the digital models. Okay, yeah, see? So, yeah, right. So I have to bring this to a closure. And of course, all this work wouldn't be possible without a major effort by many people now over many years. So here, I cannot name them all. So I'm just showing you two photographs. One from early days of the Iowa Flood Center, and then another one more recent. And so let me just use this opportunity to thank all of them, and all of you, Iowa Flood Center, people, for the great work that you have, done, and how you benefited the people of Iowa. Well, and then we couldn't, do this alone. We had to work with other agencies. We developed excellent relationships. We like each other. We even had some comments from visitors from Texas that's like, well, it seems that you people like each other, like what's going on? How do you do this? Yeah. So, and we said, yeah, we are Iowa nice, and it's just as simple as that. Now, because I did talk about research, my research, I have the stage here. I also have to thank all my past PhD students. So here are, the names. I hope that the list will grow. So, but with this, thank you very much. And I cannot, say that I'm looking forward for more because this is my last lecture. But thank you.
Maybe. Ooh, now I am. Wow, I hope you feel as inspired as I do by these great talks. We're just going to do a little Q&A, and then I promise you we'll get to the beverages and the food. So join me, please. Kristy and Witold, we want to ask you a few questions. And honestly, doesn't this represent Iowa the way you hope that we're represented? This amazing pair of scholars. Yeah.
Thank you.
Pretty phenomenal. Thank you for being here at Iowa. We're grateful. I'm grateful. You know, I have a whole list of questions that I know you've been prepped on, and I might not follow them. So if that's okay,
we were ready for that.
You're not supposed to do this, but I'm going to break the rules here and just go a little off script because I think you've addressed several of the questions that we've already prepped you for. So I just want to ask, and you kind of alluded to this, Witold, but maybe you can expound on it, both of you, a little more. What has Iowa done for your work? You've talked a lot about the work that you've done to help Iowa, but what about the university? What about the community? Besides the fact that we have a river here, for example, or meat packing plants here, you know, what is it about Iowa that's made your work possible?
Oh gosh, I have to say. Oh,
see, I went off script, so they don't have to think for a minute about
really
that.
Nice. What about everything? Honestly, from the Catholic lay people who funded my position, to my friends in the community who put up with all of my questions and hanging out and just like being around all the time. Honestly, and my confidence has grown here as a scholar and as a person. I've been given so much by the state, by students, by community members, by my colleagues. I love my job, and I know I feel very lucky. So honestly, it's been such a good place. I have some friends from one of my earlier research projects. They're part of the Cursillo movement, short course in Christianity, and they have this saying, "Bloom where you're planted." And I love that saying because I feel like I have really been able to bloom where I'm planted here in Iowa because of the people of Iowa. So, yeah.
Thank you. Witold,
Well, so I like, sports, and since
sports, he said.
I'm
like sports.
one franchise player, okay?
Basketball. It's all about the basketball group that you have?
Just
Wave your
in
hands,
general.
players. Those of you, okay, you've got a
your
couple.
teammates.
No, for me, my career here, which is half of my life, can be divided before the Flood Center and after, Flood Center. Mm-hmm. But even before Flood Center, I did what I wanted, to do. So much of this work with rainfall instrumentation, this was done, here. I always, found it that at the Institute I had, the support. It was always a non-nonsense place. And I could do what I wanted. But then the flood came. And that changed my life, I can say. Certainly, my career. But it just gave me such a strong, purpose. And then with the resources coming, from the state, yes, I formulated the technical vision. Everybody got on board with that vision, and that's why we could do what we did. So again, like I said, no looking back. So
that's great. So we've talked about the river as being a primary theme throughout this lecture. I wonder if you can think about your career, and this is one of the questions, so you're prepared for this. How has your career kind of evolved or flowed over time like a river? It's probably changed, and you're each at different stages in your career, but if you can reflect for a moment how it's changed over time. Who wants to take that one?
Kristy?
Oh gosh, yeah. I did have an answer prepared, but now I'm forgetting it. So, well, stage fright, I guess. Yeah, honestly, much like Witold had a pivotal moment in his career in research, the pivotal moment for me, which is actually related to rivers and water, was when I stepped inside of a meatpacking plant, thanks to my friend Father Joseph, and thanks to my friends who had been telling me about the work in these plants. And from the moment I stepped inside of the plant, the book that was called Corn Belt America now became Meatpacking, America. And for the first time, I'd always been interested in water quality, but I really saw with my own eyes what was happening. And so I think that when I took a chance and followed my curiosity and went inside of a plant and followed my instinct, I realized that so much was going on that I didn't understand, and I wanted to find out. Where is it going to take me next? I think now that I've pivoted more to administrative work, I think my curiosity and my passion for understanding the world around me, I'm trying to bring that in my new job and to try to support other people as my colleagues as they venture into our state. I don't know if my friend Nick Benson is here and Travis Krause, I can't say anything right now, but they're doing amazing work with community engagement and creating Iowa as a hub for this kind of work in our state. And so I'm just so excited to see what my colleagues and what students are gonna do to make our state better and to support the good people in our state, so.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Well,
Kind of addressed this before the flood and after the flood. But
well,
maybe you
so
could-
there was, a little bit of that. But I came to Iowa, perhaps because of the influence of my parents. Not that they ever told me like what to do, but it was like just understood that I'll get my PhD. And then I happened to come to the US with a PhD and worked for the federal government. And I value this a lot. I believe I was the first non-citizen who was a federal employee for NOAA, not for CIA, but for NOAA. So, no, so it was a great experience because I could see how the real world, works. But I always wanted the freedom of academia, and when there was an opportunity, and the opportunity didn't come at the first calling. I remember this before the internet. Some of you may remember. I sent like 100 applications. And I got maybe like, 2 responses. I even got a rejection from Iowa.
No.
No.
No, but it was like, well, thank you very much for your letter of interest. We don't have any position right now, but we will put your application in the file, and so I still have it, so.
Wow. Strange how things work out,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, no, but then again, once I got here, I could do what my curiosity pushed
that was nice
me,
of you.
to do.
We didn't plan that either, but you just said that.
Curiosity.
Yes,
I love
right.
Thanks,
that.
Vita.
And then yes, even though I studied rainfall, but the motivation was always flooding, that it will help with prediction of flooding, and so this what happened. So when they established the Iowa Flood Center, then I can say I was ready, really ready. Yeah.
Ready. I like that. So there are a fair number of students in the audience, and probably even some faculty and scholars who look at what you're doing and think, I don't think I want to go talk to legislators, and I'm really not sure I want to work in a meatpacking plant or even spend half a day there, and or whatever, more than that you did. And so I guess the question for me is, how do you address the leaps you've had to take to get out there and be proactive with your research to try to make a difference? Because we can all publish in academic journals or write books, but you're taking your work a step further. So how did that get motivated, and how do you encourage people who might not do that to think they might be able to do that?
Thank you. That's such a good question. I tell this to my students. They don't believe me, and my kids don't believe it, but I wasn't always able to get up here. Like 20 years, I would have never thought I could do this without crying and having an anxiety attack. So it's taken a lot of work to be able to do this. And also, to do the work of ethnography. But once I started doing it, and once I started making those connections and seeing, I think part of it for me too, President Wilson and friends, is I'm from a working class community. I'm first gen on my mom's side. There weren't many folks on my dad's side who had gone to college. I knew about college. I knew about college from my dad and his parents who had gone, and my aunt. But I think it wasn't something that, it was something that it was actually a dream, and to get a PhD, it wasn't something I honestly ever thought would happen. And so I think one of the reasons why I love embedding myself in communities is because honestly, the folks who worked in the packing plants remind me a lot of my family. In some ways I felt, and I remember telling my husband this after the work, and I said, no, it sounds weird, but I kind of felt at home in a weird way. I didn't feel like I had to sound smart a certain way, or I had to use big words, or I could just kind of be myself. And I don't want to romanticize the packing plants, because they're really problematic places, and I complicate them in the book. But I think that one of the things that, in my experience, I've written about this and I've talked about this other places, we've tended to ignore the working class and working people. Class has not been a category of analysis, I think, and that's something I've been really passionate about. And I think it's taken me a long time to get really comfortable talking about that, because I finally feel like I belong. I finally feel comfortable in my own skin, and I'm really comfortable talking about that. And I talk about this with my first-gen students. And so I think that for me, I used the language of moral obligation earlier. I feel morally obligated to get out of the ivory tower, and honestly, I never really felt like I fit in the ivory tower. And I think we need more people who don't feel like they fit, because I think that it's that feeling of uncomfortable that can propel us to making connections outside of here. And I learned a lot from the work in the packing plants and in the farms and the farmers I talked with and the cattle ranchers. You know, they have a certain perception of our institution, for better or worse, and I think that I like a challenge, and the challenge is to help convince folks that we're actually really cool and we really care. And so I encourage more of us to get out there, and because I really do think when we sit down and have coffee with people, and I know I mentioned casseroles, and I gained probably 10 pounds during the course. I lost some weight during the meatpacking plant because I don't want to eat. When I was in the plant, I don't want to eat. But, the casseroles are so good. But I think when we sit down, and I know it can sound trite and like a cliche, but when we take the time to sit down, get outside of Iowa City, sit down with folks, take a chance, make ourselves a little vulnerable and be brave to talk with people, I think we'll find out we have a lot more in common than we think we do. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Well, so early on, I was a purist or very naive. Okay, you can call it either way. So purist in the sense that all grants should be competitive and should be fair competition, and none of these appropriations, on the side, and. So to the point, I'm going to share a true event. So some 30 years ago, I read that Senator Grassley announced that NOAA is sending, like $300,000, dollars, here to the university. And then when I read closer, it was my grant. And I thought, like he's announcing. I wrote the proposal, So then somebody, smarter, explained to me, So, but then after Iowa Flat Center, actually, I find this very interesting. The fact that you have to talk to legislators, and they have many, demands for limited, resources, and you have to convince them in a very simple language that this is worth it. You also have to have credibility that you will deliver, and that's why we have these legislative, breakfasts. So I like it. So.
And I can tell you're good at it, too.
Yeah,
But I love the notion of translation and of really thinking about audience as you think about how to share what you're doing beyond the ivory tower, because so many of us could do more of that, I think. So here's a question that's not on my list either. What's the biggest obstacle you've faced in your research, and how did you overcome it? Biggest obstacle, besides, you know, maybe smoking for, I mean, that image is going to stick with me, Kristy, but a serious obstacle in your research, because I think there are a lot of students here that might benefit from hearing that not everything goes straightforward and easy in the work that you do.
Yeah.
Kristy, I think
Yeah.
I didn't put this on the, this
No,
isn't on the list.
you know, again, I don't want to sound trite. I know it's cliche, but follow your instinct. My gut was telling me there's something really interesting going on in the meatpacking plants, not only because all my interlocutors were telling me about their faith journey and that they worked there, but I knew something was going on in terms of like what the managers were doing with religion, how they were appropriating religious language in some good and some bad ways. But a lot of my colleagues in religious studies like, what are you talking about, religion and meatpacking plants? And I will say, I'd gotten a grant, so grateful to the Louisville Institute. So it enabled me to take a year off, sabbatical, PDA. Is it called PDA now? No, CDA. And that's when I wrote the book just straight through that year. It was a pretty rough draft. And I remember running into the then now head of Louisville Institute, and he was like, wasn't real sure about that meatpacking part or religion in the meatpacking plant, but you were onto something. So I had my doubts, thinking, I know some people are thinking this is really weird, religion at work. But I believed in it because people were telling me that it was important. I was hearing it from the CEOs that they wanted to create this work as a spiritual place. But not a lot of people were talking, not a lot of academics were talking about it. A lot of academics are talking about it now. There's actually a really interesting Faith at Work center at Rice University. My friend Elaine Howard-Eklund runs it. She's a sociologist. And so a lot of scholars are looking at it now, but at the time I felt like, okay, this is weird. Is this book going to get published? Critics are going to hate it, but I followed my instinct. So even when things seem weird and you're like, this is really dumb or whatever, follow your instinct. That's what I would say.
So I get an extra minute or two, and I still cannot come up with something.
You've had no obstacles in your work?
Sorry, I can talk more.
Not too many.
Too many.
Too many. Too many. Yeah. But over the years, I have discovered a mechanism that the funding agencies use, some of them at least, So especially those where the probability of getting a grant is low. So you have a great idea, you go there, and they reject you. And so that feels terrible. Right, you just think first it's like they don't understand, they don't get it, but they are smart because they are putting the risk on you, because like if this is like really a good idea, you will pursue this idea on your own, and then when you go back to them, then it will be like a good idea. So, good point. So I truly believe that this is what they do. So despite the fact that they say, high-risk ideas, they have no appetite for high-risk ideas, So,
yeah.
So criticism and rejection sometimes can spur you forward, is what it sounds like.
Yeah, that's this competitive, instinct.
I agree. So, I agree.
Well, I hope that you can see that we have a lot to be proud of here in two very different scholars doing very different work, but in a way I think you've forged a friendship through all of this. You've done a lot of practicing and discussing and working with us to make sure that this evening goes smoothly and flows like a river. How's that? Ooh, that's bad, right? But please join me in thanking these amazing scholars at the University of Iowa, and join us for this reception afterward. Kristy Vitek.
Thank you. You did so well. I loved your presentation. It was great.